I'd like to thank our sponsors, Blood Moon Box, a monthly subscription box service for period pads and tampons to help support all humans who have a cycle for that time of the month, and no need to run to a store to mix and match period supplies that don't cater to the entire ebbs and flows of your cycle. There are 2 box options based on your cycle, light and medium, and then heavy. And in addition to the period products, you'll also receive PMS herbal teas, a candle, and some other items for your time of the month. You can reserve a box by navigating to bloodmoonbox.com. And bloodmoonbox.com is on a mission to destigmatize the idea of period blood. At Blood Moon Box, they believe that it is the time to honor the enchanting magic within every person who has a cycle. So join us in embracing the magic of your cycle with Blood Moon Box. Hi, my name is Yasmin Terehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and consciousness. Today's episode is with Gary Moon. He works and plays at the intersection of consciousness, entrepreneurship, and private capital markets. And as the founder and managing partner at Nfluence, Gary helps mission-aligned companies and conscious entrepreneurs. And he's also married with 5 children. And between them, you can find Gary, his wife Maria, on various internal and external adventures somewhere around the world, including this beautiful weekend excursion that we met at called the Yearn. So welcome to the show, Gary.
Yes, thanks, Yasmin. Excited.
So to kick it off, Gary, can you speak about the importance of a fully integrated life? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point, and appreciate that. And for me, fully integrated life goes beyond the saying of find work that you love. For me, the idea is just so many of us walk around with these distinct roles in our life, held as separate distinctions. So my work life or my family life or my personal life or time with friends is separate. And the fully integrated life is always, as I like to say, if you can't tell whether I'm working, hanging out with family and friends, or if I'm playing, then I'm doing it right.
Oh, I love that so much. That's so great. So I love that. I haven't heard that before. And I think I'm going to have to borrow that because it's so good.
Well, I was actually going to ask you because this, my observations of you, this fits you pretty well too. So.
Oh my gosh. Gary, it's so funny. I feel like I do the work play balance a little bit differently. I have periods during the year where I would say probably a month or so every quarter, every 3 to 4 months, where I just take off a month. I don't really talk about it. I don't tell many people, but I do bake in so much playtime, which I feel is separate from work time. But even the times that I am working, I'm oftentimes just enjoying everything that I do, and I think that there's such an energetic cost to everything that we put our energy into. So, for example, if I'm working with someone that I'm not feeling aligned with, then actually there's a lot more of an energetic cost, right? And if I do feel aligned, then I actually feel like I gain more energy from our exchange and our interaction. So that's kind of the way that I look at work-life balance, is really managing my energy rather than my time, and then taking a lot of breaks to play.
Sure. Well, I love that this is where we start, because I'm going to challenge you a little bit on some of that, because I think you're pointing to some things that I'm super passionate about, and how we language them. And maybe the first thing to double click on is those folks you're working with who bring you energy and those who drain energy. And part of the idea is really, it sounds simple, and I know business is complex, as it is in mine, as it is in yours. But part of the idea is to spend more of the time with those who bring energy into your life, in a business context. And so whether that's a product shift or whether that's a targeting shift or whether that's a relationship to abundance instead of scarcity. Maybe I don't need to take that client, or not to say that rest is not important. Rest is definitely important, but part of my own journey has been, kind of successively pivoting into things that are more purpose driven, companies that are more purpose driven, entrepreneurs that are more conscious. And while I certainly have room to go, it's, every year, if I can spend more time with those folks as my clients, then you can really hardly call it work, because I'd probably be hanging out with them doing some conscious community thing if we weren't working on a deal together. So that's just one sort of element that I would kind of challenge the thinking.
That's interesting. Yeah. When I look at my kind of the way that I commune with my colleagues at work, and I think work is just such a strange, name to call something, because especially we have these like hyphenated careers, at least I do, in which I'm, what does it mean? Like I'm an entrepreneur, and I have an agency, and I coach folks, and I have a book, right? But all these things are different. So it really just depends on the context. I think that what I don't like is like the admin parts of work.
Yeah,
I would love to outsource that, which, and I've
sure.
had the opportunity to outsource these things, but I actually really like seeing my full schedule too. So there is a part of the admin piece that I don't like. And I do think, I think that I find myself needing alone time to really integrate parts of work, within my own inner psyche, my own nervous system, if you will. Like the more that I take on, the more my nervous system has to be bigger to really integrate it and embrace it. And so it's this interesting dynamic where I find myself wondering, is this an energy cost because my nervous system can't handle it? Or is this an energy cost because it's a challenge? And is it a challenge because I'm avoiding it? Or is it a challenge because it's truly not in alignment? And those nuances are so specific and so different, And so, yeah, it's something that I just spend my time thinking about a lot. I don't think I have an answer, but
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there is an answer. There's sort of only the answer that you choose at any given time. And, like I said, totally agree that rest and time alone, time in nature, these things are super important. So fully integrated life does not mean you have to be with people all the time. Goodness knows people who know me know that I need plenty of alone time here as the introvert who plays extrovert for a living. So I'm 100% with you there.
Hmm. So, Gary, can you tell us a little bit more about like what does conscious capitalism actually mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, so conscious capitalism has a couple of different kind of traditional definitions, which, if you look at sort of the John Mackey, Raj Sisodia framework, where it's call it stakeholder capitalism, the idea being, not to geek out too much, but most of Delaware law is driven around shareholder primacy, meaning everyone's job is to make the shareholders more money, and you literally can't take other considerations in mind outside of that. Where stakeholder capitalism brings in elements like community, like your employees, like your purpose in the world, the social element you're trying to impact, and those things can sort of sit at an equivalent place to shareholder return when you're ultimately making decisions about the business. But at the same time, I would say Gary's definition of conscious capitalism also kind of falls a little bit more into the conscious leadership domain, which is part of that sort of overall view of the world, but where I really think there's opportunity to make massive impact. And if you think about any given company and having leadership that's really focused on creating a conscious culture, that impact is going to permeate, everyone in that organization, everyone in that organization's stakeholder set, suppliers. You can really double click again and again on how far you sort of ultimately propagate that kind of a thinking. But the part of it that really just gets me excited is, what you often hear is you're learning some form of conscious practice at work. And then you have people come back and say, this has made me a better father, or this has made me a better husband or a better wife. And these things that you end up ultimately learning as part of your business life have dramatic, or the potential at least for dramatic impact at home as well. And that for me is the ultimate propagation of, if you're going to impact the world, if we're all really going after waking up the planet, then the best way to do that is going to be get to the business leaders who can propagate this stuff throughout their organizations and the families and the people they do business with.
Mm. So, Gary, you've obviously worked with so many leaders at these companies. What is sort of the inner world of a leader that is willing to shift or willing to kind of look at consciousness, within the realms of business?
I think that's a great question. I think likely if they're listening, they know it already. So there's, I don't think this is too much rocket science outside of who are those people who choose to wake up, whether they're a CEO or a mom or a community leader or an artist, right? Is it's at some point you've heard some calling that, whether it's a spiritual emergency or, sort of waking up one day and realizing there's no there under the achievement rubrics that we're all sort of taught. And you get that first opening that there is something bigger, something beyond us, some way of living that allows me to, move from unconscious reaction into conscious choice. And then, the second and co-equal important piece of that is really, for lack of a better way to say it, what are you going to do about it? Right. So it's one thing to have an awareness, which is beautiful. It starts with awareness 100%. But at some point you got to get off the mat and not just with yourself, the people around you, and really lead. And so again, that's sort of when it gets really exciting. I've shared lots of space and programs and conversation with leaders who are, various stages along this journey. And I think as they, sort of going back to the previous point, as they sort of ultimately see the kind of impact that they're making, especially in their own organizations, it gets pretty exciting.
What are actually, now I'm curious, what are some of the kind of ways you've seen some of these leaders cultivate consciousness and bring consciousness to their organizations through some of the programs? Like maybe what are your favorite case studies that you've seen?
Yeah, so I consider myself really, really lucky. I was in a group of entrepreneurs, I don't know, 20 something years ago. I'm dating myself, but that went to MIT every year as part of an EO program called Birthing of Giants. And a couple of the folks in that group took what was called an integral leadership class, and this is probably 20 years ago, from an organization called Stegan, and really one of the very early sort of conscious integral leadership training programs developed. Brett Thomas was their curricular development. Rand Stegan is the founder and CEO of the organization, and I ended up going through the program, I don't know, 14, 15 years ago. And that was such a huge awakening opportunity and, sort of thematically similar to the things we're talking about. Not only in my own thinking as a leader within an organization, but I honestly saw even more dramatic impacts with my kids and sort of the choices that I was making in life. And so, Stegen, huge bow of gratitude to that organization. They continue to do incredible work. One of the groups that is also doing great work, Conscious Leadership Group. So, for example, we're reading the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership right now in my organization, which is a fantastic book. They've got a lot of great material out there. And then, there are, sort of different consultants, advisors, coaches that are in amongst those types of organizations. And I'm sure there are more that I just haven't spent time with doing very, very similar work. And I guess the one thing that I would say is I've found there's sort of two schools of thought, and one is go train the leader, and then the leader comes back. The other school of thought is to really integrate it into the organization. And I think there's space for both, or maybe need for both. Because that leader's time away to go work with other leaders and learn together is important. And at the same time, we all know the entrepreneur who comes back to their business after a workshop and has 17 ideas that his poor team has to try to implement. So you also, it's also very handy to have somebody to help you kind of bring these things back into your organization and sort of develop the drumbeat. And consistently, we certainly had a great one of those in our early Nfluence starting days. Nathaniel Chalkin, who I originally met through Stegen, who did some awesome work with us for about 3 years as we were getting the firm started.
Oh, amazing. Wow. And you mentioned kind of that this work also just impacted some of the choices you made in your life. Like, how so? Like, how did some of the tools kind of impact your trajectory, and how did that also contribute to the genesis of starting Nfluence Partners?
Yeah. I mean, I always love stories. One of the things that I really loved about Stegen is they took concepts that might be more psychological, spiritual, and really put them in very common language. So they were very, very accessible. And so there was this one exercise, like I literally remember it, the awakening moment from it. And they called it game filming. And it's basically you go through a process where, what is the situation? What would the videotape say? And then how did you feel? And it's similar-ish to like The Work from Byron Katie, if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
And I sort of got to the end of the process, and this was something I had done with my son, and he must have been, 10, 11, 12 at the time. And I got to the end of it, and I'm like, oh my God, I am acting like my mother. My mother, who I have this incredibly challenging relationship with, and how I grew up. And like at the end of the process, I'm going, oh my God, I'm my mom. Like, what the hell is going on here? And so that was like my first awakening foray into, kind of family trauma, like how all those systems and brain wiring and grooves kind of really occur. And it was just sort of a lightning bolt. Once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. So it like started very dramatically shifting how at least the practice of showing up as a father definitely continued to learn for many years. So
Oh my gosh, it's so interesting. Like some of these, workshops or practices and tools and frameworks at some of the different programs, and they really make a huge impact on how you see the world. I just came from the Hoffman Institute this summer, which
for
was
sure. Yes.
very
Yeah,
revelatory.
100%.
Yeah, like I think a lot of people are not quite even aware of the conditioning or programming that they are brought up with, and how much that impacts the rest of their life. It's just it's fascinating.
For sure. Well, and I'm curious now that you mention Hoffman, like is there like a big pop or realization coming out of that you're open to sharing
Oh,
with us
okay, we're
all here?
going there.
We
This
are
is
going there,
Oh
This
my
is a
gosh.
conversation.
Yeah, it's fun to be on the side of just asking questions instead of I guess sharing so much of my vulnerable space here. But here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say. Well, so for those who don't know, the Hoffman Institute is kind of a program in which you explore your negative love patterns from your parents, and you do this like 12-hour questionnaire, and then you get like, I don't know, a couple hundred um, negative love patterns, some that are from mom, some that are from dad. And it's really not about blaming parents, because everyone did the best they could. And I would say like, my parents are amazing. So I really don't have anything to complain about. But the interesting thing that comes out of it is like, it's the human condition that when we are coming of age and moving from childhood into teenage years, like we sort of have a resistance to having some kind of authority or hierarchy in our life. And our parents play a huge role in that hierarchy. And so whenever we face hierarchy in any other situation, we basically take out our negative love patterns that we learned from our parents onto that person of authority or hierarchy in any other situation in life. And it shows up the most in romantic relationships, and it shows up the most at work with a boss. so
Mhm.
so it's very interesting. And then I can't remember exactly like what my top 10 were, but there were, I think that there's probably, what I discovered was like a little bit more of an an avoidant quality, or like pushing folks away type of quality, which is interesting. I think being a child of folks who had to leave a dictatorship, I think that there was a lot of a desire to sort of contain um, energy within oneself, and not necessarily get let as much love in as one could. And so that's kind of the way that what I
Mm.
took away from that was pretty awesome. Just the idea of wow, okay, maybe I there's like a negative love pattern in which you reject others before they reject you. And sometimes I was probably doing that unconsciously or subconsciously, where I'd push people away without really knowing it.
Mm. Yes,
So yeah,
the underlying without really knowing it, right? That's amazing to bring into
yeah,
awareness.
yeah. So
Yeah, beautiful.
Gary,
Thank you.
oh, thank you. Thanks for asking. Yeah, so let's actually talk about, I think, the cultural aspect of scaling a business. And, you talk about this role, like the chief cultural officer. What does that mean to you? What does culture mean to you? And why is having that role important?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Part of my influence journey is within investment banking to create a firm where trust and collaboration is at the center, and that's really unfortunately rare and unique in this industry. And so spent a lot of the early foundational years really deep in the cultural development and what we wanted to do there. And the thing that I do want to say, and especially when you're in sort of markets like this where economic uncertainty, we're in a tech recession, which impacts you and me and others in that ecosystem. There is a little bit of a pendulum on these things. I'm not answering your question, but I will ultimately answer your question. And I feel like at times this is very similar to the idea of what makes a great mission aligned business. At the end of the day, these things are businesses, and businesses need to perform. It is, capitalism, whether conscious or unconscious, or however you feel about the broader system, it punishes your mistakes. And if you're not performing, it shows up on the P&L and your ability to raise money or your ability to grow or your ability to exist. And so I want to just sort of caveat and, very humbly admit that these kinds of markets can be very humbling for all of us, myself included, where I probably let the pendulum swing a little too far into culture, and didn't keep that fierce eye on the performance side of the business. As I think they say something like, when the tide goes out, you can tell who's wearing trunks. That's we've had 18 months of that around here, and so it can be really tricky. Now, that also doesn't mean you sort of throw culture overboard when things get tired. In fact, I think it's the opposite. A lot of the work that we did really built an incredible foundation that when things did get challenging, that you can sit down and you can have those conversations, those difficult conversations that if your team isn't trained on giving and receiving feedback, as just sort of one example, or nonviolent communication in a similar sort of direction, then you can have an organization where people are like yelling and throwing chairs and taking things personally and are 5 steps up the ladder of inference and making stories about this and that and the other thing. But if you've done that cultural work, then you can sit down, you're giving people the benefit of the doubt. If you don't have understanding, you engage to try to find understanding and perspective taking. And while difficult conversations are still difficult, they are at the end of the day navigable. And so, that's, I'd say, just at least for us, one of the bigger payoffs in all of that work is we've been able to keep most of our people. We've been able to have, courageous and difficult conversations when necessary. And, as things, knock wood, hopefully continue to improve on the economy, we're getting to the other side of all of this. And the organization will be stronger, and always expressing gratitude for lessons, even if I swear at the lessons from time to time. But the lesson here is both, right? It's at the end of the day, it's an economic system. Your business has to work within the economic system and perform at the level that you're expecting it to. And, deepening your culture allows you to do that more effectively in good times and make it through to the other side when times are a little more challenging, in a much more seamless and holistic way.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring that up because, and also just the idea of having and training people to have difficult conversations, which I think are one of the most important skill sets you can cultivate in your life, is being able to sit in the discomfort, of of being wrong, or doing something that maybe is not what you expected or what you planned, and feeling discomfort. All those things are just so important to building character, and I think what better training ground than to do it at work, which you can take into so many other parts of life. I just anecdotally will share, when I was in corporate, that I found that the 360 review process was it felt very strange, in many ways. Like,
Sure.
it actually felt mostly strange when only one person was giving a review that you couldn't give back. That to me was very strange.
For sure.
But and I think I will say, I think a lot of people actually don't know how to be managers and don't know how to be leaders, because there is no real training a lot of times for that in the corporate world, right? Like, there's a lot of people that get promoted into a management position because of the work that they've done, but they don't really have the skill sets, like the inner work. Haven't done necessarily the inner work to be able to train people. And I do think that, I haven't worked in corporate for so long, but this is what I remember, that you can only sort of rise to sort of the level of energy and character of the person that you are reporting to. Like if you want growth, you can only really grow as far as the person, is above you, because then it becomes sort of this strange space where you're like, well, I could do this. Maybe I would have done this differently. And it feels just, just uncomfortable. So it is, I think management in general is such an interesting topic to explore, especially when it comes to like building conscious businesses. And I don't know the answer to that, but it is just something I've reflected on quite a bit.
Yeah, no, spot on. I think I was listening to a Joe Hudson podcast about business as a spiritual practice. And I think that's another sort of way to think about what we're just talking about here. And that is, what if this situation in front of me right now, what if that wasn't just my job or a place that I had to be or a thing I had to go do? Or what if it wasn't a grind? Like, what if the situation is the next step on my learning and growth path? That's an opportunity to learn, what am I getting stuck in? And there are definitely, sort of whether you take your own tools and practices to it or whether the organization has something in there. I just love this idea because this is like, again, depending on the role, this is like where the rubber meets the road. Like you're in this mix of humans doing their human things. And, shockingly, that's not what we all, people don't behave like we want them to. Right. And so it's just this big mixer of people doing people things. And so what an opportunity, when you're in the luxury, I guess I would say when you're in the luxury of, being a couple rungs up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like there are a lot of people who don't maybe have that luxury. So, calling out to that element, that we're grateful to be well up. But, in that situation, bring that spiritual practice idea to it. I mean, just even in my own day to day, like this is now one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about, like, oh, maybe this person isn't a pain in the ass there. What is it that I'm meant to learn here?
Right. Right. I love that. I love that self kind of inquiry, because I've also noticed like that we do a lot of projection generally, right? Like
for sure.
we especially if there is like some kind of hierarchy, whether hierarchies in general are very interesting. I could speak a little bit more about that from an energetic perspective. Like I think whenever there's a hierarchy, the energy actually is distorted. For whatever reason, the energy between two people is distorted when there's a hierarchy, and in both ways, when someone is above you or when someone is below you. It's just because I think that all systems in nature like balance, right? And so when it feels energetically out of balance to feel like there's a hierarchy, and so even if, let's say, at work, there is some kind of hierarchy with manager, the person underneath. I think that the best thing you could do in your mindset is to just see you as an equal, regardless of the amount of resources they have, status, title, and otherwise, because I do think that there's a lot of projection that sort of happens where we have these visuals of people in our mind, and we sort of find evidence to sort of to fit with the visuals about them, and I think impressions are so dangerous to have. So the idea of just having a beginner's mind of connecting with someone, and we're all human, right? We're all capable of projection, myself included. But I'm aware when I'm doing it, and I don't like it because I notice that that there's so much that can come from the empty space if we give people the empty space, to sort of unfold, the parts of themselves that I haven't created an opinion on. So, yeah.
Well, this is where I really love the, like one of the things that we've fully baked around here and is the idea of the story that I'm telling myself in the ladder of inference, right? So the
Mm.
ladder of inference roughly is your beliefs affect what you infer based on what you observe, right? And then, so then the story becomes the belief, and then the story becomes the fact. And when you're sort of 5 steps down the road, you may have kind of forgotten what the videotape might say, and you're in your story. And so, kind of a great, again, sort of language we use around here, and I forget exactly which organization or multiple organizations. It's instead of me saying, hey, John, when you did this thing, it really bothered me because I thought you could have done a better job. You would say something like, hey, John, I'd like to talk about this project you were working on for me. And the story I'm telling myself is you didn't put a full effort forward, right? And so it sort of has that slightly disarming, because it's the story that I'm telling myself, and I'm opening myself up to an alternative viewpoint, to a different perspective, and I'm seeking to understand. And so when you sort of roll that all the way back, like one of my daily mantras, if not hourly or minutely, depending on what I'm doing, is to just see something clearly. And that's, in sort of the purest Buddhist experience, or it just is. And if I can see the just isness of it, then that's the place to begin. So many people don't do that, including myself, when I'm at less than, full capacity for these things. But it's such like a simple framework, yet can be so incredibly complicated when you're at various stages of capacity at any given time.
Gary, can you actually give us an example of that? I'd love to understand that point a little bit deeper. Just, the concrete example of how you pause, and like what are the moments that sort of that catalyze that pause of the isness? Like, yeah.
Sure.
Do you just do it on automatic pilot, or what's your process for that inquiry?
Oh yeah, no, gosh, I wish it was on so the second half of the mantra is, if I see it clearly, then decisions become straightforward, right? And so I'll give a sort of specific generalized example. So I'm building an organization, and this is an organization full of high performers who are also culturally aligned to what we're trying to grow as an organization. And so in 2021, all things are beautiful in tech, and things are going amazingly well, and we're all having record years. And I see the beauty of each of these people who work for me. And what I'm not seeing are sort of the cracks in the foundation of an individual employee's or person's performance. And because the story I want to believe about my business is that we are changing the culture of investment banking, then I look past these performance issues that, if I were fiercely attuned to individual performance, I would see very clearly. And so this is a case where the story has blinded me to the truth of what's observable. Now, fast forward to 2022. Guess what? Those facts are very observable. And you sort of replay and go, and then you see it clearly. Now, the 2022 version is, I now suddenly have to get square with the truth that this person, these people are not performing. And this vision that I've built of this thing that I'm trying to build has started to crack or crumble or change materially based on the facts that are there in front of me. And so in that moment, what are my choices? My choices are to continue to live in my story. Now, this is where it's a business comes in. Yeah, the economic system of business will crush you if you don't align your belief system to the facts. And at the end of the day, pick a company in this situation right now, you're going to run out of money, or, revenue growth slows, or you're worth 20% of what you were worth in 2021, or, sort of pick your flavor. The facts are there and available. It's, do I want to see them clearly, or do I want to live in the story that I've created over the last 12, 24, 36, fill in the blank number of years to get to this point? And so that's where fundamentally, for me, the mantra and the practice is, the facts sitting in front of me are, this person is not performing. My economic system can no longer allow for non-performance in the way that I could make that decision 12, 18 months ago. What am I going to do? Well, it's pretty clear at that point, if you're going to look at the facts of the situation, you got to make a change. Or you have to run into the wall of your belief system hitting the reality of the marketplace. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I like the way you articulated that. I'm like thinking, how do you know? Because there is so much seasonality, especially in the tech world, and just given where the economy is, there's just a lot of ebbs and flows in general. And then you add the tech piece on top. There's a lot more ebbs and flows. You add conscious, leaders on top of that. There's, it's just a lot of uncertainty. And so I wonder, you talk about this being like a pendulum. I wonder, like, when you make the call on whether something is final, versus seasonal.
Yeah, I mean, first, it's why I call it a practice. When I think about meditation, here comes a thought. Oh, let me focus on my breath. All right, no different. Like, this is a practice. You're not going to get it right all the time. I wish I got it right more times than I didn't. But you are constantly learning. For me, what is true is available at any time. My ability to see what's true may or may not be, right? And so that's where, it's hard to put into every specific example. And, certainly there will be examples that are outside of decision-making control that will dramatically impact people. But even that is a truth, right? And so your acceptance of that truth, your awareness of that truth is a layer. Your acceptance of that truth is a layer. And then deciding what to do about that truth is another layer. So I would posit, in anything that is, has ebbs and flows and ranges of normalcy, you should be able to, one is hopefully able to see whether it's just ebbs and flows or if it's going in a different direction. If you ultimately kind of look hard enough. But I think what's more interesting in that question isn't like, what's the data you're getting? It's right. What is happening to your mental model? And are you, peeling back enough layers of the onion to see the truth that's sitting right there in front of you? Most times for me, honestly, if I can really, really see the truth, the decisions get pretty easy because the truth is the truth. And then the options that fit with the truth are sitting there pretty much clear as day. That doesn't mean going right or going left is an easy decision. It's not always. But I can at least see that it's, right or left.
Yeah, amazing. Wow. So, Gary, I want to kind of collect our thoughts on kind of your journey with Nfluence and creating the company, which I think for folks who are not listening, maybe you can actually share a little bit about Nfluence and what you guys do and sort of, what the next steps are for your business.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. So Influence, we're a boutique investment bank. So we work with technology companies. And the ways we work with technology companies are either to help them scale and grow through finding the right sets of investors, or to help them with mergers and acquisitions, whether that's usually for us, we're working with folks who are on the sell side or looking to be acquired or being acquired. Um, and where our sort of sliver of the universe is our focus, and really the founding principle of Influence was to work with purpose-driven businesses and conscious entrepreneurs. As a tech practice, we certainly have to do more than that, and work in the broader ecosystem and a lot of venture capitalists and private equity firms. But sort of the foundational DNA, and where I'd love to see the firm 5 years from now, as more and more of our business is working with these purpose-driven companies and conscious entrepreneurs who are trying to make their own dents in the universe.
Are there any like verticals or industries that you are particularly interested in or tracking?
Yeah, I'd say at that intersection, the areas that we spend a lot of time in, wellness and digital health. We put out a pretty big report every year in that area. So we've got lots of clients, from mental health to meditation and mindfulness to content to employee wellness. Those are all areas that I'm personally passionate about. And, sort of speaking of fully integrated life, I walk out of my office some days and I'll have, strung together Zooms with 4 or 5 different wellness companies working on different aspects of problem solving in the world. And it's just like, I'm super pumped and I'm excited. And I go home with energy, not go home drained of energy. Right. And so there's definitely some method to the madness behind who we spend time with. But other verticals, ed tech, climate and energy transition, those are sort of the three bigger ones that we focus on. And then also, I would say consumer, sort of the better for you um, consumer universe.
Hmm. I love that. Those are industries I also deeply, deeply care about. So I'm just so happy that you
Mm-hmm.
you have those in your portfolio. And why do you think that this subject is so important, Gary? Why did you choose to spend this next chapter of your life dedicated to this work?
I mean, that's a great, great question. Um, when I started my overall consciousness journey, it was really all about breaking the karma for my kids. You know, to your earlier point on parents, thankfully, I've healed with my parents and we're in a beautiful place. And I love my mom and dad. And, they were doing the best that they could. There were many years that was not my view of the world. But as I sort of woke up and started moving into consciousness and healing, it was really kids at the center. I wanted to show them what's possible.
Hmm.
At some point in the journey, I woke up more to purpose. I woke up to this idea of fully integrated life. And, the fascinating thing about investment banking is it draws people who are attracted to money and power. Guess what? Because that's what we do for our clients, is help them on those things. So maybe no shocker that it draws people who are attracted to that. And just while there are many, many awesome people in the industry, it's also littered with many people who are very unconscious and, pray to the god of the dollar. And so that was always incongruous with my own growth path and belief system, which has ultimately led to the breaking point of needing to just start my own firm and put those things back at the center. So, all of that is a long way of saying, I realize that peace, joy, and play are available in any moment, the more I unpack and the more I learn. And that part of my purpose in the world is to open that opportunity for as many people who are willing to say yes to it as possible. And how I do that is by, reaching CEOs and giving them examples and being a lighthouse and bringing them to things like the Yearn and conscious leadership as my own way of hopefully what I believe is an acceleration of moving consciousness on the planet.
That's so beautiful, Gary. That's
Thank you.
amazing intergenerational, gift as well. It just feels so healing on both sides. And, I want to talk before we wrap up. I want to talk a little bit about the Yearn because this is how we met. And I know that this is, something that's very near and dear to both you and your wife Maria's heart. So I was wondering if you could share really what the Yearn is about and why you started it.
Yeah. So thank you for asking. This is such a core area of investment and mission and purpose. And we absolutely love doing it. And, what else can I say aside from meeting epic humans like yourself as a big part of the design? But, we call the event in one way the gateway event for the conscious curious. And that's sort of a cute way to think about it. But the goal is just really, maybe not surprisingly 100% consistent with this conversation. When we're all out there in the world, we meet people who are at various stages of their growth journey. And when you meet somebody, or I meet somebody, I'm privileged to meet a couple hundred CEOs or founders and a couple hundred investors every year. When you meet people, it's not the most natural conversation in a business context to say, hey, have you ever been to Peru and do ayahuasca? Although that's obviously changing. But you're maybe not, going to drop in super deep with somebody, and maybe there's some code words and mindfulness or different practices that people employ. And so it's really the space where we can invite those people that we meet along the way who are newer on the path or emergent on the path. And, the Yearn, as you experience, is just this big buffet of lots of different learning modalities, talks, practices, medicine, and microdosing as an example, where we're really just, if you're open to awakening, and whether you're curious or just newer on the path, the hope is that folks find that they're in this safe container in a way that is incredibly unique and most people don't experience. That allows you to explore these different, maybe uncomfortable, maybe woo-woo, maybe, different labels that people put on them depending on where they come. And find what's really resonant for them. And then sort of coming off of that, not only do you have a community, not only have you met people who are successful entrepreneurs, investors, change makers, artists, whatever, who are deep on the path to be in community with, but there are teachers and modalities that we can sort of help people guide them to for their own growth journeys. So think of it a little bit like a consciousness accelerator, or there's all sorts of kind of fun ways that you can play with it. For me, it's a big part of this idea of the fully integrated life because, I haven't got one of my kids there yet, but I'm still working on it. We'll get one of them there soon. But we invite friends. People come out of there as friends. I've had clients there. I've had former clients there. I hope to have had future clients there, investors I've worked with, people we do projects with. So think of it as another kind of expression in this idea of fully integrated, where you can go play together, learn together. We don't do much work there, so admittedly it is a no pitch zone, but You might do business with folks afterwards. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I've developed many, many friendships from the Yearn, and just I'm actually about to go meet up with someone from the Yearn tonight. So,
Ah,
um,
brilliant.
yeah, yeah. So it's the
Amazing.
gift, the gift that keeps on giving, and there's so many wonderful like workshops and leaders who come in and talk about something within the realm of consciousness and their modality, and so yeah, it's always been very revelatory for me, and I love the dinner conversations. I think that they are just highly curated and really intimate conversations that stay with me. That really they kind of stay with me permanently, unlike many other dinner conversations. So I really
Yeah,
I
right. Well, maybe I would love if you would describe what that is for everyone, because that's definitely a part of the design.
Yeah, I mean, I think that well, I'm going to speak kind of in reference to the last dinner conversation because every night there is a different kind of cohort of people that come together, and I think without saying names, there was just really fascinating, diverse folks in the world of technology, consciousness, creativity, plant medicine. Um, I would say like consciousness TV almost. And we the questions and the conversations felt very generative and deep and intersubjective, but also very intimate in a way that I think a lot of us don't really go there in our day to day conversations, especially with new friends and new people, new colleagues. And so I think the sort of forcing function of of asking deep questions and also giving everyone a chance to have their space to kind of speak without interruption, I thought was really great. And I just really appreciated the sort of intergenerational, diverse demographic placement for myself at least at the
Hmm.
dinner. And I really appreciated that conversation, and it's opened up a lot for me with the folks there. So yeah, so I'm excited about so much to come from both you and Maria, and the Yearn and everything else that you're working on and collaborating on. And as we're wrapping up, what kind of things have surprised you the most on the journey, Gary? And what is your main takeaway?
Um, what's surprising me most about the journey? I'd say one of the things that um, I don't know the best way to say it, but the ego is super tricky. It is a crafty little devil, and the example that I give is just even on in my own journey, and I see this in other people's journey is, the classic spiritual kind of trope is at some point you have an awakening and an ego death, um, and then what you see are a lot of folks who are then move into this um, spiritual elitism or spiritual pretty, or there's a bunch of different names for it, but it's like, hey, my ego death was level 7. How about yours? Like, it's kind of like they've traded their spiritual quals for what was supposed to be an ego death, on whether it was achievement or money or whatever their prior vice was. Now it's just achievement, or I'm sorry, it's their level of spirituality, or one that I was challenged with on my own is, I've been in sort of existing pattern of achiever and working hard and grinding and all of that stuff that I'm trying to give up the language on. But I woke up a couple of years ago after starting Nfluence, and I just realized, oh my God, like I have traded purpose as my master for achievement as my master. And it was like this blinding lightning strike moment. And I'm just like, holy shit, like I am in the same pattern here, only driven by how many people am I going to impact, or all these things that sound awesome. and are awesome objectively. Helping more people is great, but not if it's your master.
Right.
Right. And so this is like a frame that I look at a lot of things as people sort of fall through or rise through different stages of development is when does that tricky little ego pop back in, and how does that manifest? Or is that, and the ego is a good thing too. Like, don't get me wrong. And when it's fully integrated, it can be a beautiful thing. But when you trade out something else that becomes the new master,
Right.
it's
Right.
still in charge.
Right. Wow. Yeah, it's really cool that you have that self-awareness, and I love the ego death levels. That's so funny and so spot
Totally.
on. It's just like, yeah, there is this like spiritual egotism, that we have to be careful of. Like, oh, I've done more work than you, that kind of stuff
Right.
is
Totally.
cracks me up. It's actually like worse than, than like not even being on the path. It's hilarious.
Agreed.
What do you want to tell people as like your main takeaway, and like where can people find you if they want to get in touch, if they want to like kind of learn more about you, your work, or even just to get involved with the Yearn?
Yeah. So I am shockingly, for being in the networking business, not the best marketer in the world. So LinkedIn or hit me on email is probably the best way to go. It's pretty simple. Gary Moon, Moon. Like you said, I love the last name, by the way, but pretty easy to find on those. And absolutely, anyone interested in the Yearn, hit either one of us, and happy to chat about that. Main takeaway? I would say something along the lines of, the juice is worth the squeeze. So it can be incredibly, incredibly challenging, the growth journey. But the sort of the peace or serenity or gratitude, even when it's just on moments, even when it can be, challenging in between. Wow, that is just heaven on earth and expansive time when you can sit in that space and just be grateful
Hmm.
for everything that is in front of you. Wow, it's such a beautiful place. I'm so grateful that all of the growth opportunities in my life that I wasn't so grateful for have sort of led me to this point. And my hope is we can get as many people to the same place as possible, or the same
Oh,
path as possible.
amen. Yes, yes, yes. Well, Gary, thank you so much for your time. This was so awesome. I really appreciated your questions.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for bringing it.
Thank you. And for folks listening, in this episode, we learned about conscious capitalism with Gary Moon. And you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and consciousness. Thanks again. What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self-mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly, live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed. And you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead.